Commander Thelos of the Vithene Empire stood on the bridge of his warship, watching the main view screen with practiced patience. He'd done this hundreds of times before. A new species would wander into their territory, confused and primitive, and within hours they would surrender. It was always the same story. The Vithene had been doing this for thousands of years, expanding their empire one system at a time. His mandibles clicked together softly, a habit he'd picked up during his long career. Another ship. Another species. Another easy victory for the records. Commander, we have an unidentified vessel on long-range scanners, his sensor officer called out from her station. It just drifted into our territory. Looks like it's alone. Just one ship. Thelos found that amusing. Most species at least sent a fleet when they discovered new space. Run a full scan. Let's see what we're dealing with this time. The officer worked her console, and data began streaming across the secondary screens. Thelos watched the information populate, expecting the usual readings. But his officer's antenna started twitching, a sign of confusion in her species. Scan complete, Commander, she said slowly. Vessel designation reads as UNSC Defiant. Species classification comes back as human. But sir, their technology level is concerning. Thelos moved closer to her station. In all his years he'd never heard her use that word about a new species. Concerning usually meant dangerous. But how could one primitive ship be dangerous? Explain concerning, he said. The officer pulled up the technical readouts. Sir, they're using fusion reactors. Basic fusion. The kind we used when we were just learning to leave our home world. And their propulsion system runs on chemical reactions. Actual chemical propellants like controlled explosions. She paused, looking at him with wide eyes. We haven't used technology this primitive in 10,000 cycles. Another officer from the weapons station spoke up. Commander, their hull is made of metal alloys. Steel, titanium, some kind of composite ceramic. It's what we used to build our first colony ships before we developed proper materials. Thelos stared at the data. This didn't make sense. How is that ship even functioning in deep space? Those materials shouldn't hold together under the stress of faster-than-light travel. The radiation alone should tear through that hull. I don't know, sir, the sensor officer admitted. According to our models, that ship is a death trap. But it's here. It's intact. And it's definitely occupied. Thelos studied the image of the human vessel on screen. It looked brutal and ugly compared to Vithene ships. No smooth curves or elegant design. Just angular plates of metal bolted together, with what looked like visible weld marks along the hull. Weapons turrets stuck out at odd angles. Exhaust ports leaked small amounts of gas into space. The whole thing looked like it had been built in someone's garage. Broadcasting standard contact protocol, his communications officer announced. Opening all frequencies. Thelos straightened up and delivered the message he'd given countless times before. Unidentified vessel, you have entered Vithene territory. This space is claimed and protected by the Vithene Empire. Power down your weapons systems and prepare for inspection. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force. You have 60 seconds to comply. He waited. Usually, primitive species responded immediately. Sometimes with fear, sometimes with attempted bravado, but they always responded. It was instinct. When a superior force makes contact, you acknowledge it. But this time nothing happened. The human ship just floated there in the darkness of space. Its running lights were dim, barely visible. No response came through any communication channel. It didn't power down. It didn't move. It just hung there like a dead thing drifting in deep water. Are they receiving our transmission? Thelos asked. Yes, sir, the communications officer confirmed. All their antenna arrays are active. They can hear us. They're just not responding. 30 seconds passed. Then 40. The bridge crew watched in uncomfortable silence. This had never happened before. Even the most aggressive species responded to first contact, even if just to threaten back. Time's up, sir, someone said quietly. Thelos felt a strange sensation in his chest. Not fear exactly. He'd been in combat before. But this was different. This silence was unnerving. What kind of species receives a message from an unknown military force and simply ignores it? Scan deeper, he ordered, his voice firm. I want to know everything about that ship and who's on it. Full spectrum analysis. Biological scans. Power readings. Everything. Yes, sir. Initiating deep scan now. The sensor officer worked her console faster, cycling through different scanning frequencies. The rest of the bridge crew watched the human ship on screen, waiting for any sign of movement or response. But it just stayed there, dark and silent and somehow threatening in its stillness. Fellows had a thought he'd never had before in all his years of service. Maybe they should have sent more ships. Maybe one warship wasn't enough for first contact with these humans. He pushed the thought away. Ridiculous. They were the Vithene Empire. One primitive ship couldn't possibly be a threat. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The deep scan initiated, and the sensor officer watched her screens fill with data. But something was wrong. Instead of clear readings, she was getting scattered information, pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together. "Sir, our scanners can't penetrate their hull properly," she said, her confusion evident. "I'm getting interference patterns I've never seen before." Fellows moved to stand behind her station. "What kind of interference? Are they jamming us?" "No, sir. That's the strange part. They're not using any active countermeasures. It's their hull construction itself." She brought up a detailed analysis on the screen. "They've layered their ship with lead plating. Actual lead. And behind that they have tanks of water built into the hull structure. Then ceramic composites mixed with the metal. It's creating a natural barrier that scatters our scanner beams." Another officer from the science station spoke up. "Commander, that's not defensive technology. That's radiation shielding. Primitive but effective. They built their entire ship like a bunker." "Why would they need that much shielding?" Fellows asked. "Because their technology is dangerous to them," the science officer explained. "Their fusion reactors must leak radiation. Their propulsion systems probably expose the crew to particle streams. They're protecting themselves from their own ship." The sensor officer managed to push through some of the interference. "I'm getting partial readings now. Life signs are confirmed. I count approximately 200 crew members aboard. What else can you tell me about them?" The officer studied her screen, and her antenna began twitching again, faster this time. "Sir, the thermal readings don't make sense. Some sections of that ship are reading at 45 degrees. That's too hot for most species to survive in. But other sections are barely above freezing. They're operating in temperature extremes that should be lethal." "Maybe their environmental systems are failing," someone suggested. "No," the science officer countered. "If life support was failing, we'd see the crew moving to safe zones. But they're distributed normally throughout the ship. They're functioning in those conditions like it's normal." Fellows felt increasingly uneasy. "What about radiation levels?" "That's even worse, sir." The sensor officer pulled up new data. "I'm detecting radiation inside that ship that would kill most of us within hours. The kind of exposure that causes cellular breakdown. But their crew is just living in it, moving around, working. How is that possible?" The science officer had been running biological scans, and now he brought his findings to the main screen. "Commander, I think I know why. Their biology is unlike anything in our database. Look at this." The screen showed a breakdown of human physiology, and Thellos studied it with growing concern. "Their stress hormones are constantly elevated," the science officer continued. "Adrenaline, cortisol, other compounds we don't even have names for. Their bodies are always in what we would consider a combat-ready state. Heart rates elevated. Neural activity patterns that suggest constant alertness. They're not relaxed. Ever." "You're saying they live like this?" Thellos asked. "In a permanent state of stress?" "I'm saying they evolved like this, Commander." The science officer expanded the display. "Look at their organ structure. They have redundant systems. 2 kidneys when one would work. A heart with multiple chambers and backup pathways. Their blood carries oxygen with incredible efficiency. And their immune system is terrifyingly aggressive. It attacks threats we can't even detect on our scans." Another officer added to the analysis. "Their pain tolerance is off our measurement scale. What would incapacitate us might not even slow them down. And their healing capabilities suggest they've evolved to survive repeated trauma." "What kind of world produces a species like this?" Thellos wondered aloud. "A death world," the science officer said quietly. "They had to become this to survive their own planet." "Commander, I've been analyzing their movement patterns from what little we can scan. Their muscle structure, bone density, neural pathways. These are persistence predators." "Explain that term." "On their world, they probably hunted by chasing prey over long distances. Not fast sprints like ambush predators. But steady, relentless pursuit. Hour after hour. Day after day if necessary. They don't give up. They don't quit. They just keep coming until whatever they're chasing literally drops dead from exhaustion." The officer paused. "And then they evolved intelligence on top of that. Tool use. Strategy. They became persistence predators with weapons and planning, The bridge was silent as everyone absorbed this information. Fellows looked at the human ship on screen with new understanding. It wasn't just ugly and primitive. It was brutal and efficient, built by a species that expected things to go wrong and planned to survive anyway. "Sir, what are your orders?" his tactical officer asked. Fellows made his decision. They were still the Vithene Empire. They still had superior technology, superior weapons, superior shields. One ship full of tough biologicals didn't change the fundamental math of warfare. One ship, Fellows said firmly. Primitive technology. They're outnumbered and outgunned. They just don't know it yet. He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire a warning shot across their bow. Close enough that they can't ignore it. Maybe seeing our plasma weapons will convince them to communicate." "Yes, sir." Charging forward plasma batteries now. The weapons hummed to life, and Fellows watched the targeting system lock onto a point just ahead of the human vessel. A simple demonstration of power. That's all it would take. He had no idea how wrong he was. The plasma bolt launched from the Vithene warship, a bright streak of superheated energy cutting through the darkness of space. It passed within 50 meters of the human ship's bow, close enough to light up their forward hull with reflected energy. A perfect warning shot. Impossible to miss. Impossible to misunderstand. Fellows watched his display, waiting for the response. Now they would talk. Now they would realize what they were facing and surrender like every other species had done. For 3 seconds nothing happened. The human ship just floated there, silent and dark. Then every light on the Defiant blazed to life at once. "Sir, they're powering up," the sensor officer yelled. Reactor output just jumped to maximum capacity. Weapons systems activating across their entire ship. "What?" Fellows leaned forward. "We fired a warning shot. That should have made them stand down, not?" "They're turning," the tactical officer screamed. "Hard turn, acceleration spike off the charts. They're coming right at us." On the view screen the human ship rotated with impossible speed. The kind of maneuver that should have torn the vessel apart from the forces involved. The kind of turn that should have turned the crew inside into paste from the acceleration. But the ship held together, and it didn't just turn. It accelerated directly toward the Vithene warship like a missile locked on target. "Evasive action," Fellows shouted. "Get us out of their path." His pilot worked the controls, but Vithene ships were built for precision, not rapid movement. They were designed for measured combat at comfortable distances. Not for desperate maneuvering against an enemy charging straight at them like a mad animal. "Too slow, sir. They're closing too fast." "Fire. All batteries," Fellows ordered. "Stop them." The Vithene plasma weapons opened up, 3 direct hits in rapid succession. The superheated energy splashed across the Defiant's hull, melting through the primitive metal plating like a torch through ice. Holes opened in the human ship's armor. Atmosphere vented into space. Fires erupted inside the visible sections. But the ship didn't slow down. It didn't veer off course. It just kept coming, burning and damaged, accelerating even harder. "They're not stopping," someone shouted in panic. Then the human ship fired back. The weapons weren't energy-based. They were physical. Solid metal projectiles launched at incredible velocity from what looked like magnetic rails running along the ship's spine. Simple kinetic weapons. The kind of guns that threw pieces of metal really, really fast. Kinetic weapons? Fellows stared in disbelief at his tactical display. Who uses solid projectiles in space combat? That's ancient technology. The answer came 3 seconds later when the first railgun slug hit them. It passed through their energy shields like they weren't even there. The shield didn't slow it down, didn't deflect it, didn't even register the impact. The solid metal projectile just went straight through and punched into their hull with devastating force. The second slug followed. Then the third. Then a dozen more in rapid succession. "Shields aren't stopping them," the tactical officer yelled over the sound of alarms. "The projectiles are passing right through." "That's impossible." Fellows grabbed the railing as the ship shuddered from impact. "Our shields stop everything." "They stop energy weapons, sir," his chief engineer shouted from his station. "Plasma, lasers, particle beams. The shields are calibrated for energy-based threats. These are solid chunks of metal moving at hypersonic speeds. The shields aren't designed for physical objects." The realization hit Fellows like one of those metal slugs. The humans built their weapons to fight other humans. Species that didn't have energy shields. Species that used armor and metal hulls. Their entire military technology was designed around penetrating physical defenses, not energy barriers. Another volley of railgun fire tore through the ship. Alarms shrieked as decompression warnings flashed across every screen. 3 decks were breached. Atmosphere was venting. Crew members were dying. Return fire. Keep firing. Fellows ordered. The plasma batteries kept hitting the human ship. The Defiant was burning now, huge sections of its hull melted and torn. Any sane species would have retreated. Any normal crew would have been dead from the damage already sustained. The humans didn't retreat. They accelerated harder. Brace for impact, someone screamed. The Defiant crashed into the Vithine warship with the force of a meteor strike. Metal screamed against metal. The whole ship shook violently, throwing crew members from their stations. Lights flickered. Secondary explosions rippled through both vessels. But the human ship didn't bounce off or drift away. Instead, Thelos heard a sound he'd never heard in space combat before. A deep, resonating clang that echoed through the hull. Magnetic clamps, his engineer shouted. They're locking onto our hull. Multiple contact points. They're what? Thelos pulled himself back to his feet, staring at the damage reports flooding his screens. They're attaching themselves to us, sir. They've deployed magnetic grapples all along their hull. They're physically connecting the 2 ships. The sensor officer's voice was barely a whisper, but everyone on the bridge heard it clearly in the sudden terrible silence. They're boarding us. Thelos looked at the view screen at the burning, damaged human ship now locked onto his vessel like a parasite. Through the torn sections of hull, he could see movement inside. Figures in armored suits were gathering near the breach points. He'd made a catastrophic mistake. He'd fired a warning shot at a species that didn't warn. They didn't posture. They didn't negotiate. They just fought. And now they were coming aboard. The Vithine security team assembled in Corridor 7, just behind the breached section where the human ship had locked on. There were 20 of them, all trained combat specialists. They'd done this before. Pirates, rebels, even other military forces. Boarding actions were messy but manageable if you had training and discipline. Their squad leader checked his weapon one more time. Standard issue stun rifle, designed to overload an enemy's nervous system and drop them unconscious. Non-lethal, efficient, approved by every interstellar treaty. Perfect for capturing boarders alive for questioning. Remember your training, he told his team. They're primitives with outdated technology. We stun them, secure them, and hand them over to intelligence. Simple operation. The team nodded, taking positions behind portable cover. They could hear sounds from the other side of the damaged airlock. Metal scraping. Tools working. The humans were cutting their way through. Steady, the squad leader said. Let them come to us. We have the advantage here. The airlock exploded inward with a force that sent shrapnel flying down the corridor. Not cut open. Not carefully breached. Just blown apart with what must have been chemical explosives. The kind of brutal, imprecise entry that endangered everyone, including the attackers. Through the smoke and debris, figures emerged. Humans in armored vacuum suits, bulky and crude compared to Vithine combat armor. But they moved fast, fanning out with practiced efficiency, weapons raised. Fire, the squad leader ordered. The stun beams lanced out, invisible pulses of energy designed to disrupt neural activity. The lead human jerked as the beam hit him square in the chest. He stumbled, went down to one knee, his weapon dropping from his hands. Got him, the squad leader thought. See, simple. Then the human stood back up. What? The squad leader fired again, hitting the same target. The human staggered but stayed on his feet this time. Then he picked up his weapon and raised it. Stuns aren't working, one of the guards shouted. They're not. The human weapon fired. Not an energy beam. Not a plasma bolt. Just a loud crack that echoed in the metal corridor. A chemical propellant launching a solid projectile. The guard who'd shouted took the bullet through his thorax and went down, purple blood spreading across the deck. More humans poured through the breach. The Vithine security team kept firing their stun weapons, but the humans just pushed through it. Some stumbled. Some showed signs of disorientation. But none of them went down and stayed down. Their nervous systems were too redundant, too aggressive, too different from every other species' biology. And the humans fired back with weapons that didn't stun. Weapons that killed. Fall back, the squad leader screamed. Fall back to secondary positions. But the humans didn't give them time. They advanced with terrifying purpose, firing those chemical weapons with brutal accuracy. And then the squad leader saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. One of the humans, a big male, ran out of ammunition. Instead of retreating to reload, he just kept coming forward. He pulled out a knife. An actual blade of sharpened metal. And when he reached the nearest Vithine guard, he used it. Another human grabbed a guard with bare hands and twisted. The sound of the guard's neck breaking was loud in the chaos. These weren't just soldiers. They were predators, comfortable with violence at ranges where civilized species would never fight. The security team broke and ran. Training didn't matter when the enemy didn't follow any logical rules of combat. On the bridge, Thelos watched the security feeds with growing horror. Camera after camera went dark as the humans advanced through his ship. They moved through corridors still venting atmosphere like it was nothing. They operated in sections where radiation alarms screamed warnings. They just kept coming, relentless and unstoppable. "Seal the bridge," Thelos ordered quietly. "All blast doors. Maximum security." The heavy doors slammed shut, tons of reinforced metal designed to protect the command center from any attack. For a moment, Thelos felt safer. Then he heard cutting tools on the other side of the door. It took them 8 minutes to breach the bridge blast door. 8 minutes that felt like hours. When the door finally failed, torn open by shaped charges and cutting torches, Thelos stood from his command chair to face them. 4 humans entered. 3 held their weapons ready, covering the bridge crew. The 4th, clearly their captain, stepped forward. Her helmet was cracked, and Thelos could see her face through the damaged faceplate. Blood ran from a deep gash above her eye, running down the side of her face. Her suit showed multiple breaches, patched with emergency sealant. Radiation burns marked the exposed parts of her skin. She should have been in medical care. She should have been unconscious from her injuries. She should have been dead. Instead, she stood straight and looked Thelos directly in the eyes. "You fired on us," Captain Hayes said. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. Like they were discussing the weather instead of standing in a captured bridge surrounded by the aftermath of violent combat. Thelos found his voice. "Your ship, you took direct plasma hits. Multiple breaches. Radiation exposure. Your crew should all be dead." He gestured at her wounds, the damaged suit, the blood still running down her face. "How are you still fighting? How is any of this possible?" Captain Hayes smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. It was the smile of a predator that had just caught its prey. The smile of a species that had evolved to win no matter the cost. "We're human," she said simply. "This is what we do." Commander Thelos sat in his own command chair, but he was no longer in command. 4 human soldiers stood around the bridge, weapons ready, watching every move his crew made. Captain Hayes stood nearby, arms crossed, that unsettling smile still on her face. The gash above her eye had finally stopped bleeding, but she hadn't bothered to properly treat it. "You're going to send a message home," Hayes said. It wasn't a question. Thelos nodded slowly. "What do you want me to tell them?" "The truth." Hayes gestured to the communication station. "Tell them exactly what happened here. Tell them what we are. And tell them to stay away from our space." Thelos moved to the communications console, his hands shaking slightly as he activated the long-range transmitter. He'd sent hundreds of reports in his career. Victory reports mostly. Announcements of new territories claimed for the Vithine Empire. This would be different. The recording light activated and Thelos began to speak. "This is Commander Thelos of the Vithine Imperial Warship Crimson Dawn, sending emergency priority transmission to the High Council." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I am ordering an immediate abort of all planned campaigns in Sector 773. Mark human territorial space as restricted. Under no circumstances are Vithine forces to engage with human vessels or enter their claimed systems." He could almost feel the confusion this would cause back home. A commander ordering the council? Declaring entire regions off limits? It was unprecedented. But they needed to understand. "I'm transmitting combat footage with this message. Watch it carefully." Thelos pulled up the security recordings from the boarding action. The first clip showed a group of humans preparing to breach the airlock. What struck him most watching it again was that they were laughing. Actually laughing and joking with each other seconds before entering what should have been a deadly combat situation. One human clapped another on the shoulder. Someone made a comment that caused the others to grin inside their helmets. They treated imminent danger like it was just another day at work. The next clip showed the moment his security team opened fire with stun weapons. The humans absorbed the neural disruptors and kept fighting. One took 3 direct hits and stayed on his feet, returning fire with those brutal kinetic weapons. Another clip showed Captain Hayes herself walking through a corridor that was actively burning. Fires raged on both sides, the atmosphere was venting into space, and radiation alarms were screaming. She didn't run. She walked calmly through it all, grabbed a wounded crew member and dragged him to safety. The wounded human, A male named Tyler or Trevor or something like that had taken shrapnel to his leg. He was still conscious and fighting even as he bled. They evolved on a death world, Fellows continued his report. I've reviewed the data we gathered from their ship's computers. Their planet has gravity 20% higher than our standard. Just standing on their homeworld would exhaust most of us within hours. They grew up carrying that extra weight every moment of their lives. He pulled up more data. The atmosphere they breathe is toxic to most species we've encountered. High oxygen content that would poison our blood. They need it to function. Their weather systems are violent beyond reason. Storms that would tear apart our cities. Temperature swings that go from freezing to boiling. And they built civilizations anyway. Another video clip played, showing the humans fighting through a section of the ship where coolant had leaked and frozen everything. They just adapted, changing tactics, using the ice to their advantage. Their world was full of predators at every level, Fellows said. They had to become the apex predator just to survive. And they did it through persistence. Through refusing to give up. Through developing redundancy in everything they build and everything they are biologically. He gestured at the Defiant, still locked onto his ship. Look at their vessel. It took 3 direct plasma hits that should have destroyed it. The ship is still functioning. Still capable of combat. Because they designed it expecting catastrophic damage. Their ships are built to keep fighting even when crippled. Half the systems can fail and they'll still find a way to complete their mission. Fellows showed footage of human crew members manually operating weapons when the computer systems were damaged. No AI assistance. No automated targeting. Just humans calculating trajectories in their heads and firing anyway. And hitting their targets. Their crews expect disaster, Fellows continued. They train for worst-case scenarios as standard procedure. What we would consider catastrophic failure is just a problem to solve for them. They plan to win anyway no matter what goes wrong. The most disturbing clip came next. Captain Hayes, injured and exposed to vacuum for almost 30 seconds through a suit breach, calmly patched the hole and kept moving. The medical data showed her body's response. Massive adrenaline surge, blood redirected to vital organs, pain suppression through natural chemicals her body produced. She'd been aware the entire time, making tactical decisions while her biology fought to keep her alive. They have no hive mind, Fellows said quietly. No shared consciousness like some species. No psychic links. Each human is independent. Alone. But they don't see that as weakness. Each one fights like their entire species' survival depends on them personally. That level of individual determination, multiplied across billions of them, makes them unstoppable. He looked directly into the camera. They don't just survive in hostile conditions. They thrive in them. They actively seek out challenges. They turn themselves into living weapons because their world gave them no choice. Evolve into perfect survivors or die. They chose to survive. Fellows ended the recording and transmitted it with his full command codes. Back on the Vithine homeworld, the High Council would receive it within hours. The council chamber was silent as they watched Fellows' transmission. All 12 council members sat in their elevated seats, antenna twitching with agitation as the combat footage played across the central display. When it ended, nobody spoke for a long moment. Finally, the council leader stood. We must vote on this matter. All in favor of marking human space as forbidden territory and ceasing all contact. 12 hands raised as one. Unanimous. Within an hour, every Vithine star chart was updated. Human territorial space was marked in red with a border that no ship was authorized to cross. Below the marking, a simple warning appeared in every navigation database. Do not engage. The Vithine had learned something that day. Something that would reshape their understanding of the galaxy. Some species weren't worth conquering. Some species were too dangerous to provoke. Some species were better left alone. Humanity was all three.